You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. Alongside Mike Chappell and Matt Adams, I'm Dave Griffiths. Glad to have you here as essentially the playoffs have officially begun for both the Indianapolis Colts and their opponent this weekend, the Houston Texans. You win, you're in the postseason. You lose, your season is over, and you're cleaning out your lockers on what would be Sunday, I guess, perhaps, as the Colts and Texans face off at 8:15 Saturday night. Kickoff at Lucas Oil Stadium, game broadcast by ESPN. Chap's getting his Sprite ready.
I meant to do that before we went on the air.
So today's podcast brought to you by Sprite.
Exactly, refreshing.
Refreshing lime taste.
It used to be my go-to long ago when I was younger, and then I discovered the joys of caffeine in other sodas that kind of took me elsewhere. But I'm pretty sure Sprite's
no caffeine.
Not caffeine-free, and you're spilling all over there. Gee whiz, we're crying out loud.
Okay.
It's all right. We're fine. It's not gonna harm anything.
And it's not my
there.
house.
Exactly. No. Yeah. Yes. No. It's not. And with that, folks.
I misdirected you already, didn't
Exactly, completely. We're already off track, and we're not even into the first story, which this week we're going to get into. We're going to touch on one story that is a important story to at least mention before we dive into the meat of this show, talking about the Colts and the Texans and the upcoming playoffs. But just this past week, tight end Drew Ogletree for the Colts was arrested. He has been put on the commissioner's exempt list in the NFL after the arrest last Friday in a domestic battery case. We've read the probable cause. It is not a pretty picture. And I'll say this, Chap, from just the football perspective, which is what I will stick to here, because we're not a crime and punishment show. I'm not going to get into the analysis of what's been said, what has been claimed, what he has claimed, and everything. But I will say it's a horrible position for a second-year guy to be in who had showed plenty of promise. And, of course, the comeback is if he put himself in that own position. So I want to get past all those qualifiers. I want to talk about the football side of things because this is a football podcast. But Drew Ogletree has done himself no favors right now. It's, like I said, just an unfortunate spot for him football-wise for a young guy who had showed some promise here in his first couple of years with the organization.
Yeah, because you just don't know what went on. I mean, again, we've all read the probable cause, and we've seen the he said, she said. But from a football point, this is a guy, like you said, he's in his second year, has shown quite a bit of promise. And you wonder how this is going to impact that later on, regardless how it turns out, because teams, if you're not really a top-tier player, mid-tier player, they find reasons to either cut you or not sign you. Mm-hmm. So we'll see where it goes. Unfortunate, really unfortunate from a football standpoint. It takes away from a football standpoint, they are equipped to move on without him, mm-hmm. with Granson and Mo and
Mallory.
Will Mallory, who I tell you,
been pretty good.
Right now, Will Mallory's tight end one. He really is. So, yeah, unfortunate. And it's just like, of course something was going to, not this, but of course something was going to happen because something's happened almost every other week with these guys.
That's right.
So I think what's amazing is how they've overcome them, moved past them, dealt with them, probably more at the coaching level, and then that filters down to the players. But it's incredible how they have overcome so much injury, suspensions, this thing. So it's, kudos to them, but you hope for the best for Drew Ogletree, but you just can't put yourself in that situation.
No, being arrested on felony charges, even the arrest is a big stinking deal, obviously. And that's why you go on the commissioner's exempt list. You're off the roster. The Colts can add someone else to the 53-man roster, all those things, and he stays on there until...
And he gets paid.
Exactly, and he gets paid.
$40,000 a week.
Yep. So that's happening right now. But things move on, and that's, I think, all the time that we need to spend.
Well, but that's the point with a young player. Things move on. The league moves on.
Yeah.
There's
And you just sit there, kind of.
Yeah, not a tolerance for this, no matter how good the player is. But as I said, when you're, go back to Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown, whatever they did, the league moves on.
Isaiah tweeted, by the way, that he did not kill a bald eagle. Just so everybody is aware.
Have you ever had to tweet that I didn't do
I did not
that?
kill a bald eagle. No, I've never had to do that before.
That had been the thing that's been swirling around social media for the last couple weeks.
Which brings us back to lesson number 1 of Twitter is don't tweet. And then after that, you can go on and do whatever you want. By the way, you can follow us on Twitter at Colts Blue Zone, and I am at DaveG_sports. Mike is at MChapel51. Matt is at Statomatti. So we do encourage you to follow us and accuse us of not following our own rule of not to tweet. And maybe you'll learn a little bit here and there about the Colts, about who's playing, who's not playing, some ins and outs of lineups and all that online, on Twitter, on X, whatever you want to call it. But
it's Twitter.
It is, and it will forever be Twitter. That's just what it is to me as well. The Colts are one step away from the playoffs, Mike. They are a 9-win team, at least, entering the last week of the season. They were a team that was given by Vegas a 6.5 win total over-under.
I took the under.
And you famously took the under.
So I'm out $25
with your daughter, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And they have undoubtedly surpassed expectations. But entering this last week, they have a whole lot riding on the line. And if you're not going to be a bad team and get a top 5 pick and all your eyes are for the future, this is probably the Colts have, I think, exhausted all of their potential for this year.
Correct.
To be right around this spot. And they're doing it against a team that is very much in their shoes, if not even more so overachieving or exhausting their potential with the Houston Texans and their first-year quarterback in C.J. Stroud.
The difference being that they've got their quarterback, C.J. Stroud.
Right.
And that's why I think what the Colts have done is more impressive, because when you lose, they've had, I think Stroud's missed 1 game, 2 games?
He missed 2 with
a concussion. So, and boy, they hit on Will Anderson too. Mm-hmm. So they've gone through a bunch. They had, remember, their offensive line was in tatters when the Colts went down there.
They had at least 3 starters out there week 2.
And the Colts did what you're supposed to do. They had like 6 sacks.
Yep.
So, but kudos to both teams. And what this does, it just shows you the potential future of the AFC South. I realize that Jacksonville's in a death spiral, which is incredible to watch. And Trevor Lawrence, I think, is going to be questionable again for this week.
They said he might be limited in practice today.
Right, which is it's never a good thing when your quarterback might be limited.
And they might get Christian Kirk back as well. Core muscle issue with him. He hasn't played since December the 4th.
So, all of a sudden, in my mind, the team that you're not quite sure what you got at quarterback is Tennessee. Levis has shown you things, and then you think, we need more.
He's looked like a rookie at times as well.
Right.
And he's playing behind just an abysmal offensive line. But
at least all 4 teams have their guy moving forward, which is really, really encouraging. But what's on the line here is just really they've been. I think they've been in. This is a 4th win and in last game of the season in the last. Is it 6 years? They run together. But remember Frank's first year. It was in Nashville. Mm-hmm. Win and they're in it, and it was the last game of the season at night. So. We're really going to – one thing that Steichen said, he says, we're going to find out a lot about ourselves, which that's what you do. But this is what you want. We talked to DeForest Buckner today, and he said, comparing it to last year, that circus. He said,
that's the nicest thing you could call it.
He said last year at this time, a lot of guys had their vacation plans, and they probably left from their exit interviews to the airport. So this is what you want. And, Zaire Franklin compared – setting the franchise record tackles last year, and doing it this year. He said it's just night and day when you're doing things that helps your team get to where it wants to go. So you kind of like to see them finish it, and 10-7 in the playoffs is just so much better than 9-8 and pats on the back and, well, maybe next year.
The AFC is going to be a pretty interesting weekend, and I think all across the NFL it's going to be an interesting weekend.
And NFC is pretty interesting, too.
I believe there are 20 teams that are still eligible for the postseason, and that
most since like 1980-something.
And part of that goes to the fact that they expanded the playoffs since then. There's a whole nother place just a couple years ago in 2020 for teams to get in a 7th spot there. But it's nevertheless true. There are more teams that are able to make there are more teams playing for something this time of year, which the NFL loves because there will be more eyeballs on TV sets across the country. By the way, the game, once again, on ABC and ESPN this weekend. So I don't even know where it's on locally, but we'll definitely say it's on ESPN. It will be simple for the Colts and Texans. You win and you're in. But there's the added benefit that if they win and the Jaguars lose to the Titans.
Whichever team wins.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Will then win the division and get a home playoff game next week, which would always be fun, a home playoff game at Lucas Oil Stadium. But there's a whole lot of things that could go in different directions elsewhere. The Buffalo Bills could be.
Isn't this just the craziest thing?
All the way up at the number 2 seed behind the Baltimore Ravens, who are number 1, locked in. They're not playing for anything against the Steelers, except playing the Steelers, which is always a big rivalry for them. Buffalo could be all the way up at number 2 if they beat the Dolphins, but they would miss the playoffs entirely if they lose to the Dolphins and the Jaguars win their game and the Steelers win their game.
All that's very possible.
And Colts Texans doesn't end
in a tie. Yes. The things that could keep Buffalo out of the playoffs are things that could very easily happen.
And that's why the NFL put that game, I think, in the Sunday night last game of the regular season place. It could be all or nothing for Buffalo. We'll see based on everything else that's happening with the Steelers, with the Jaguars, with the Colts and Texans. But that could ultimately just be a game for the AFC South versus a wild card position as well, which is still a big deal for both of those teams, the Dolphins and the Bills at that point, because you want a home playoff game, no doubt. And it could be very relevant for the Colts because they could be going to Buffalo or going to Miami.
Kansas City. Isn't it going to be Buffalo or KC, I think?
Are those the only two?
So.
Okay.
I think that's
and if you win the division, you've got Cleveland.
Okay, yeah, some cold weather places. So as of a week or two ago, it looked like it might be Miami in the future for the Colts. And now, unfortunately, we're not booking any trips to South Beach anytime in the near future to travel for the postseason. It would be either Buffalo or Kansas City or staying right here in Indianapolis if they get that win and the Jaguars lose and they get to host there in the first round of playoffs.
And since we go down those rabbit holes, I mean, I realize there's the mystique of playing the Chiefs at Arrowhead. I wouldn't be that overly concerned if I'm the Colts going to KC.
Right.
Because right now they're not playing well.
I was about to say, who would you rather play right now, KC or Buffalo?
Yeah,
or Cleveland at home.
Or Cleveland at home. You can, or I think you can argue. I would argue that Buffalo would be the one I would. I wouldn't want to play
Buffalo.
The team I would least like to play this time of year.
Because we had talked that a month ago they were the one team, the scariest team to play, and they may not make it in, and that's still true.
Right.
But I still like the way they can take over a game. KC, I think they're broken. Mm-hmm. Cleveland, you keep waiting for Joe Flacco's, the pumpkin thing. So, but he's an amazing story. But with these guys, I don't care that people think, well, even if they get in, they're not going to make a deep run. So what?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. So much of this year we've talked about and we've written about that this year was all about the quarterback, getting him time, reps, and for next year. And now here you are, so you seize the moment. You have no idea what next season is going to be. You're right there. You're home. Yes, Houston has this quarterback who's setting rookie records and all that stuff. One game, 4 quarters, you just seize the moment.
Well, and even if their young rookie, their rookie quarterback isn't in there for them, the Colts still have a young roster. So postseason experience still very, very big for the team if they can get there.
Then we look over in the NFC. The 49ers have clinched the top seed, the first round bye. Other than that, Dallas and Philadelphia, Detroit, and the Rams have all clinched spots too. If Dallas wins, they win the NFC East. Philadelphia can win with a win.
They're a mess.
Listen, both Philadelphia and Kansas City right now. Philadelphia even more so, a mess, losing to Arizona last week. Look, you don't have to get me started about everything that's going wrong over there in Philadelphia, but there's plenty of it. And if you don't remember, last year, there was a lot going wrong there too. But Then they came here and played the Colts and beat the Colts, and it was their get-right game. And they got right there probably
They're running out of get-right games.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, they don't. You would think that they played the Giants here in the last week of the season. They played the Giants 2 weeks ago. They had literally the easiest finish to a season ever. The Giants, the Cardinals, and the Giants again. Come on. If you can't get right for the playoffs playing those 3 teams, then you don't deserve to be in the playoffs right now. But anyway, rant over. I'm not going to rant about the Eagles anymore. I promise I won't. But there's no NFC South champion either. The Bucs control their own destiny there. They win, they get it, but the Saints and the Falcons are still alive if the Bucs slip up. The Packers face a win and they're in scenario against the Bears. How about that? Jordan Love perhaps leading the Packers to the postseason in his first year as the starter there in Green Bay. And still alive. Seattle still alive. Atlanta, Minnesota barely alive. The Vikings, a lot of things have to fall their way.
They've got to win, and I think there are 3 different teams that have to lose in order for them to
The Colts have faced 1 or 2 of those scenarios over the years. When you're going into the last week, you're like, we still got a chance. And their hope springs eternal.
So every once in a while it pans out.
Yep.
But it's not highly likely that they'll get in. And then there is another bizarre scenario. This is not going to happen because we don't have a lot of ties in the NFL.
Not with that attitude, it won't.
But these 2 teams did tie last year, the Colts and Texans. If the Colts and Texans were to tie in this last game of the year, if Jacksonville and Pittsburgh were to lose, then both Indy and the Texans are in the playoffs, with Indy being the AFC South champion and the Texans in as the 7th seed.
How crazy would that be?
That would be insane.
Remember, that was happened. Was that just last year or 2 years ago when it was the Raiders and the Chargers playing? I think that was 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah, and they were. If they tied, they both made the playoffs. We already knew that because it was a later game. Or if one of the teams won, only one of them made the playoffs, and then it went to overtime. And you're like, do they just keep kneeling and go to the playoffs like this? But no, the Raiders, I believe, were the ones who won, and the Chargers missed out on the postseason that way. That was good times.
But this is exactly what you mentioned. This is what the NFL wants.
Yep, 100%.
I mean, even the Bears, who are not in the playoffs, they got eliminated last week, but because they set up this schedule with divisional teams playing, they get to play their hated rival, the Packers.
Get to keep them out of the playoffs.
And get to keep them out of the playoffs.
Darn right. Yep.
And that's what we talked about with Jacksonville, and they go to Tennessee. I think Mike Vrabel's going to have his team ready to play. I mean, he even mentioned that. He said, it sucks to lose.
Yeah,
I don't care.
Great rant on winning and losing.
Right.
And losing specifically.
And that's what, if you can't get in, then you want to make sure that the other team doesn't get what it wants.
Bring them down with you.
Absolutely.
Right.
Just set it on fire.
It's not been a good season for Derrick Henry. You think he'd like to have that one last, because this is probably his last game in Tennessee. Maybe the same with Tannehill if he's the quarterback. So this isn't an easy final game for Jacksonville. Again, like we say, who knows what their quarterback status is, and they're simply not playing well.
Lot to be determined, but fortunately for the Colts, it's very simple. Like we said, you win, you're in. That's it. Beat the Texans, who you beat once this year already. Obviously, both teams are far different than they were back there in Week 2 when they met in Houston.
I believe Anthony Richardson started Week 2.
I believe he did. I believe he led them to 14 very fast points in that game.
Right.
And then got knocked out with a concussion.
And that's when we saw that's when we saw Minshew come in off the bench, and God, he was like 19 to 23,
very, very
170.
well.
And so it's normally you can look back to the first game and say, well, they did totally different. Like I say, the line's different for Houston. So, but again, it's there for him, and as Shane Steichen says, it's all about executing. He's the ultimate. We thought Frank Reich was the 1-0 guy. Steichen is so much more than that. So I just hope they come out and play well. If you get beat, fine. Just don't come out there and play the Cincinnati game. Don't play the Atlanta game. Put your best out there, and if it's not good enough, then it's not good enough.
Yeah, Shane was great. We were talking to him post game, and somebody was like, "You don't seem like you're going to take any time to enjoy this." He's like, "Nope, we're moving on."
But then he relented and said maybe an hour.
Maybe an hour.
Enjoy it for an hour.
There you go.
But that's him, and we've
seen his personality.
We've seen this all year, and he wasn't that much freer or lighter during training camp. But once we get in the season, I mean, he is locked in, and we sort of make jokes about how much of a great quote he is not, but I don't think there's any question what he has brought to this team as far as structure, accountability. I mean, some of the player moves they've done shows accountability. With going back to Shaq.
Yep.
So we've had coaches here who have talked a great game. They're great during the week and they're great on Wednesdays and all that, and then they go out and get hammered by somebody. Not to say I'd much rather have a quarterback or a coach who, plays a good game as opposed to talk a good game.
And speaking of that game last week, the Colts beat the Raiders 23-20, and Jonathan Taylor had himself a very fine day, 21 carries, 96 yards. Still looking for that first 100-yard game of the season.
13 games and counting.
Yep, has not had one just yet. Some huge plays by Josh Downs on that first drive to get a big 50-yard gain to set them up for the first score. The big 58-yarder to Alec Pierce there as well as he got behind the defense. It was beautiful. Absolutely, like you could see it happening up in the press box. And on a 3rd and 1, it's something they had schemed up, which, by the way, brings me to a quick little rant here. Like you see things, and we've done this before, like when in previous regimes, under the Frank Reich regime, when the Colts would run Nyheim Hines on 2nd and 10, like all the stinking time. It just seemed like they did it all the time. Like, there's reasons that coaches do that. It's because they've studied things throughout tape and looked at tendencies from other teams, and they're trying to take advantage of what they see. We call it bad calls because it doesn't look right at the end of the day. That goes into execution as well. It goes into scheme and going up against teams that are in the right look at the right time to face these things. But that all brings me back to saying a 3rd and 1 play call here to go 58 yards deep to Alec Pierce is not exactly the play that you would expect on a 3rd and 1. You have Jonathan Taylor there who's having a good game. Like I said, you run or you do a quarterback sneak if it's short enough to try to plow ahead, depending on what team you are in the NFL. But the Colts, like we talked to them about this, and about what they saw throughout the week. If this play doesn't work well, or if Gardner Minshew underthrows it, or he overthrows it, or Alec Pierce trips up, it's a horrible call. It's terrible. What are the Colts doing? Throwing 58 yards here on trying to bomb it out on 3rd and 1. But it's executed perfectly. It comes after a week of preparation and coaches seeing things in tape and understanding this.
We're going to run the play.
And that's exactly what they did. So all that for me to say, like, this is like it goes into football being a team sport and a team game and everybody having to do their job, and that includes the coaches. That play was like the perfection, the perfect idea, the perfect simulation or example of how so much has to go into one play, and it turned out to be a pivotal play for the Colts in this game.
You say that, and it also reminded me later in the game, and I can't remember the exact down and distance, but they were it was a shorter play, down and distance, and they were giving it for a running play. Got blown up by Max Crosby because the tight end Granson could not get across to get that block in. Now, JT had some other really nice runs in this game because the tight end was able to get across formation and get that block.
The Jack Doyle block.
Yeah.
But when you can't get that, when you do get that, then you're like, oh, that's a great run. When you don't get that, that ends up being a 3-yard loss.
And as much as we're going over the top about how this has worked this year, it's because we went through last year where
nothing worked.
Nothing worked. And so much of it starts at the top. We're not here to jump all over Jeff Saturday or at the end with Frank, but when there's not the proper preparation, leadership, whatever it is, and then you get this. And again, they've not been flawless this year at all. There have been times we've thought, Shane, what are you doing? What was that? But a lot of times it's because, like you said, the block didn't get made, so you get blown up. Well, and that's where if you'd stop the play and say, okay, Shane, what were you doing? He says, well, watch this and watch this guy not get this block or whatever. Or you get a guy loose and you've got somebody holding on the play. So it's just kind of refreshing, understanding that you're going to be right like 80% of the time. But when you're right, you've got to strike. Like you say, that everything was right, but that included Minshew. It included Minshew getting the ball there and Pierce catching it, which sounds crazy, but we've seen guys, Kansas City, who couldn't catch a cold in those situations. So it's just refreshing, and that's why I keep falling back on this isn't homerish. You just want to see this team, all they've been through and all the advances they make, get the ultimate positive reinforcement and still be playing after this week.
And didn't they max protect on that one too?
I believe so. Yeah, I think they did. This was like a one-man route.
On the 50, I think Granson may have slipped out, but no, there was one guy deep.
Yeah.
Right.
That's who they were looking for the whole way, and they're like, if we can hold up here and you make the throw, then we're going to hit a big play.
There was a guy in Minshew's face.
There was, yes.
I thought it was Crosby. It wasn't. I think it was 41. So everything, so often everything has to happen for it to work. And we've seen, 7 or 8 times this year where everything's worked and the play is exactly how it worked out, whether it was the short yardage with Zaire Franklin or whatever. Things have worked out, and that's because of preparation and then it's execution.
2 sacks in this game of former Purdue quarterback Aiden O'Connell. DeForest Buckner and Tyquan Lewis both got him. Buckner, by the way, with 7 sacks, joins, I believe it's 2 other players now who has
Chris Jones and
TJ Watt, isn't it? Or is it Nick
Miles
Bosa?
Garrett.
Miles Garrett. Okay, yeah, it is one of those other guys. But over the last X number of years,
6 years.
6 years, and the only
7 sacks over 6 years.
If is Unique Ngakoue still playing? If he gets like,
he got hurt, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did. I don't think
he's hurt.
He's not playing anymore, unfortunately. So I was going to say he needs 4 sacks this last week of the season, but there's a reason that he doesn't have those sacks. He's been hurt this year. So
I think he had a season-ending injury.
There's always
you're
these,
right.
there's these manufactured stats that we all come up with, but that's a pretty good stat.
It is.
It's availability and then it's producing.
Yes.
They have to go hand in hand.
No takeaways, which wasn't that good, but no turnovers on offense. So it was a clean game. Yeah, 5th time this year. Keep it clean.
I went back and looked. They're 18-2 since like 2020 without a turnover, which a lot of teams would have that.
Exactly. That's
number.
It's such a third downs and turnovers, a big indication to just success of your team.
Especially in the last few weeks, Gardner's been pretty good taking care of the ball. Knock on wood, I probably have jinxed it.
There you go,
But
Matt.
the defense has also been really good at taking the ball away. But they had that streak at 19 games, and then second game in a row now, no takeaways.
0-0.
So it's just kind of one of those weird, quirky things.
It is weird. And they did not have Kenny Moore in that game. You never know what lightning in a bottle
That's
can
true.
produce
That's
as well.
true.
And he certainly...
Patchwork secondary a little bit there.
Yep. And I tweeted out just, I guess I tweeted out the old picture of Kenny Moore like reaching back with one hand to get that interception in the end zone in Vegas or in Oakland, wherever the heck it was, wherever the Raiders were playing at that point. But
It's hard to keep track.
Exactly. But I remember that play. I think of Colts and Raiders, and I think of that play. I know some people think of other plays when it comes to Colts and Raiders that were less good, but I do remember that play as a good example of a Colts Raiders play from the past. But this week it is the Houston Texans. Texans are 9-7, just like the Colts in the AFC South. Tied with Indy, tied with the Jaguars as well for that top spot right now. C.J. Stroud returned to the field last week after he missed 2 games with a concussion, and the Texans dominated the Titans 26-3. It was not close. We
were very close to 26-0 games in the AFC South last week.
Yes, we were, and that's what we got. Last meeting was all the way back in week 2. Colts did not have Jonathan Taylor, but they did have Anthony Richardson. Like I said, led them to 2 quick touchdowns before being pulled with his concussion. It was a 31-20 victory over at NRG Stadium in Houston.
31-10 at one
It was
point.
31-10. They stomped them, and then the Texans got a couple of some garbage time points.
Fourth quarter points.
Gardner Minshew, like you said, kept things steady. He was like 19 of 20 or something stupid.
19 and 23, I think
23,
it was. 175, 76, a touchdown.
Just was ridiculously efficient. And it's what we saw early in the season in those games where Richardson got knocked out. Minshew would come in and be very, very
Tennessee,
efficient.
a little later.
Very, very good. And then has kind of settled into his role as the starter here for the rest of the season. So that's what happened all the way back then. But Chap, it's no stretch to say that these two teams are completely different than they were back then, but I think the Texans in particular, based on the growth of C.J. Stroud, and he was in the MVP conversation before his concussion a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and that's, again, maybe they went into this season. I bet they did internally. Well, listen, this is a year we're going to get the growth from the quarterback, and then, boy, next year we're going to hit the ground running, and then all of a sudden here they are. Because he has made the transition much quicker and smoother than I think a lot of people anticipated. But they've hit on other draft picks, and that's why I say the future really looks promising for both of these franchises. Young, I say energetic. It's funny. DeMeco Ryans comes across a lot more demonstrative than Steichen does, unless you get Steichen's 45 seconds post game.
Right. That is so in that transformation from the podium to the locker room stuff.
From when he goes into the locker room and he gives them the fists and all this stuff and drops some expletives, and then when he goes through the door to the media room for the press conference, it's incredible. So I think we're seeing the more genuine guy, and he lets himself go for the players. But I say so much is in place for these two franchises from the top. Coaches, I'll mention all the coaches, and primarily the quarterback, because everything, it's all about the quarterback. And I think I went back and looked, and the story I did on Minshew this week is of the 14 teams that are right now in the playoffs, 10 of them, their quarterbacks started all 16 games. And two of the others have started 15, and then you got the Colts and Cleveland. So it's about stability and productivity at the position. And some people say, well, maybe if Richardson had played all year, they wouldn't be in his position. No, I think they would have. They probably would have won a couple other games.
Right.
Not to dismiss Minshew at all, but what we saw from Richardson was this guy is a player. So, but I think I keep coming back to the future is incredibly bright for these two franchises, and it bodes well for the division.
And I'll say this about the Texans too, Matt. Like, everybody is focused on C.J. Stroud, understandably so. But I think if you look 5-10 years down the road, the move to move up and get Will Anderson is going to be so important for that franchise too, because he has been nationally, I think, maybe more underappreciated for what he has done, but he's had an incredible year there in his first year after the Texans traded up and paid basically a quarterback's ransom to go up to number 3 because there were quarterbacks available. That's what somebody had to pay if they wanted to jump up, and they're the ones that did, and they took Will Anderson there with it, and he's been exactly what they wanted.
Well, we've talked about it a lot of times about getting premium players at premium positions, and they got it in their quarterback, and they went and they got themselves a tremendous young edge rusher, which is absolutely invaluable for any of these teams.
Well, that's kind of been their history. Mario Williams,
right?
And Clowney. I mean, so they've always gone after that guy. Remember, if I'm not mistaken, the years run together. Didn't they get Mario? His name
Williams or Mario Edwards?
Mario.
There's another Edwards. Mario.
But they got the pass rusher because of going against Peyton Manning every season. Right. So, and when you hit on you got to hit on your high draft picks. When you hit on your edge pass rusher, it's just incredible. And I think he's got like 7 sacks or whatever. So Will Anderson, and that's why I say the future is incredibly bright for these guys because they got the right guys in premium positions.
Let's take a look at their offense on that side of the field for the Texans. 13th of the NFL in scoring, averaging 22.1 points per game. The Colts just hanging on to the top 10. There they are at 10th in points per game, 23.6 on the season. So it all comes down to the final week. Yet another thing. I've been doing this very much ham-handed for the past couple weeks. Like, just, are they still there? Are they still there? Well, they still are right there in the top 10 here at 23.6, like I said, points per game. And we'll see if they can hang on to that spot. Passing yards, the Texans are 7th in the NFL in passing yards per game. Colts down at 20th. Understandably so, because it is the passing game that really is driving the Texans' offense. Rushing yards, the Texans are 22nd in the league. Colts up at 13th in rushing yards per game. Texans averaging about 100 yards. Colts averaging closer to 115 yards per game. And their yards per carry a little bit better, 3.8 for the Texans, 4.1 for the Colts. Big plays, Texans have been a big play offense, and it's been a lot through the air because Stroud can hit him deep. He's got a really good arm. He's got an accurate arm. That was everything about him coming out of Ohio State is, would he be protected like he was at Ohio State? Would he have the weapons like he had at Ohio State? Well, no, at least for a while.
And apparently it doesn't matter.
But exactly.
Right?
But he's still hitting plays downfield. He's still finding guys beyond the secondary or in between holes deep in the secondary. And hitting crossers, hitting posts, whatever it is. But they have 69 big plays this year, only 4 rushes, 65 passes.
That's amazing.
At 20+.
And the guys missed 2 games.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess that's a team statistic.
It is.
So you did have, Keenum in there. So they probably had a 20-plus play here or there, too, when he was in.
The Colts have 55 big plays on the year, so 12 rushes and 43 passes themselves. The other side of the ball, the defense. The Texans are 13th in the NFL in points per game, allowing about 21 points per game. The Colts down at 27th in the league, 24.5 points per game. That number has not improved too much over the course of the year.
It's pretty hard to change it this deep into the season.
Exactly.
It really is.
It is. What you want to do is you want to get you want to get the sacks, you want to get the takeaways. Like that's it. And
right.
we discussed this a couple weeks ago, so I don't feel like we need to get too much into that right now. Total defensive yards, Texans are 14th in the league. Colts down at 24th. The passing defense is where you can get some yardage here against the Texans. They're 25th in the NFL in passing yards given up, allowing 240 per game. The Colts are 17th in the league, allowing 225 about per game. Rushing defense, it's a lot more stout for the Texans. They're third in the NFL in rushing yards allowed per game, 88.5. That's it. And what's more impressive, I think, 3.3 yards per carry. That is like nothing. 3.3 yards per carry.
They struggled earlier in the season, but then things clicked, and this is a stout defensive unit. They're up front. Colts
way down in 27th in the NFL in rushing defense.
Maybe the biggest disappointment.
I think so.
Statistically.
Like we talked about this again with Grover Stewart leaving and coming back, and him coming back is really not done overly much to improve the rush
teams
defense.
Are getting around the edge. It's really been the Achilles heel, seems like, the last few games.
And like we said last week, when echoing what Gus Bradley had told us, like the common denominator between their two bad losses recently, the Bengals and the Falcons, thank you, was letting running backs loose, and whether that was in the run game or in the screen game. It's bad. It was really bad, and that was what enabled those teams' offenses to click. And the Falcons scored 29 against them. The Bengals scored 30 or 30 plus. I forget exactly what the final score. 34, whatever it was. Like you said, these games run together for me. So I forget.
I think that was 34-14 because it was they scored 20 straight points in the second half.
There you go. So
and before we go further, Mario Williams, 2006, first
Mario
overall.
Williams.
So the names are clouded in my head. So I just wanted to tell people I'm not completely stupid.
Just partially.
Correctly.
Yes, good. And turnovers, the Texans are +9 this year. That is really good. For a rookie quarterback, that's incredible.
Just 5 interceptions. It took him a long time until he threw his first.
You're right. It did. I remember that from the start of the season. That was a big story. They have 23 takeaways, too, which is a fair number of takeaways. The Colts have 24 themselves. Only 14 turnovers. They are averaging less than a turnover per game.
Gardner Minshew's got 14.
Yeah, right? Just one dude. Matt Ryan had 14 in like 2 games last year. Sorry, I had to. I couldn't let it pass. But we move on. The Colts are +3. They have 24 takeaways and 21 turnovers on the year. So that's, as always, just going to be vitally important this weekend, as it is every weekend. Can you force them into something? Well, good luck, because not a lot of teams this year have. So we'll see what comes across there. On offense, C.J. Stroud, 3,844 passing yards, 21 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions. He's been sacked 36 times this year. 6 of them were by the Colts, all the way back in week 2. So in 15 other games, or less than that, 13, I guess, other games, he's been sacked 30 times. 3 rushing touchdowns and 16 rushing first downs. He can use his legs, too, when called upon.
So it's not a thing that he does frequently, but it's enough to where, that's 16, so that's a little more than 1 per game that he's played. When they need to get a first down, he can pick one up.
And remember, that was a talking point, of course, leading into the draft last year, too, is how mobile is this guy really? Because he showed something against Georgia in the college football playoff, and he had never really done that throughout the rest of his career at Ohio State. Well, it turns out that he should use his arm, because his arm is pretty good.
Because that's why he does.
Exactly.
Because his arm is really good, and he's an accurate passer.
He should stay back there and try to throw the ball. That's what he does best. But he can run, if called upon, which we've seen this year from time to time. Running the ball, Devin Singletary has 835 yards on the ground, 4.3 yards per carry, also 29 catches for 191 yards. They'll also sprinkle in Dameon Pierce, 416 yards on the ground, averaging less than 3 yards per carry, though. Singletary, the much more efficient runner, averaging better than 4.3 per carry as well. Wide receiver Nico Collins is their number 1. 71 catches for him this year, 1,102 yards and 7 touchdowns. He has 21 catches of 20-plus yards, so he's the one who can get deep. An unfortunate break for them was that their rookie receiver, Tank Dell, out of Houston, is out for the year. He has 709 yards and 7 touchdowns. He and C.J. Stroud had really developed a good rapport. So from their perspective, very much an unfortunate break to have him out for the year, and for the Colts, very much a fortunate break that they don't have to face him late in this year with the playoffs on the line, because that would have been just another weapon possibly for C.J. Stroud to utilize against them. Tight end Dalton Schultz, who they got in free agency last year, 54 catches, 593 yards, 5 touchdowns for him. Wide receiver Noah Brown, 33 catches, 567 yards, 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Robert Woods, 40 catches, 426 yards, and a touchdown. That's a lot of guys, Chap.
That's like 5 guys.
You have like 30-plus catches.
Without the injury guy. It's really – and that's where we'll get into in a minute about Kenny Moore. Mm-hmm. My goodness, they need Kenny Moore this week.
They really do, because it's not just your outside receivers for the Texans that do damage. It's not just Collins. Like, you got – like we said, Noah Brown. You've got Dalton Schultz. They like to use their slot guys, and so having Kenny Moore back would be very important. Would be very helpful as we get set for this game to wrap up the regular season. Star players on defense: Blake Cashman, 93 tackles, the most that they have. Zaire Franklin would call those week 7 numbers.
That's weak sauce.
Yeah, exactly. Linebacker Christian Harris has 89 tackles this year. Jalen Petrie, 77 tackles, the safety. Sacks, they're led by Jonathan Grenard, 12.5 sacks, or Greenard.
It is Grenard.
Grenard.
I put the pronouncer in there, but I did the entry part first. Put the pronouncer down in the entry report, which does not help you since we get to that later.
No, it does not. Thanks for that, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Producing
producing wins.
Good job. Defensive end Will Anderson, mentioned him earlier, 7 sacks in his rookie year. Defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, 6 sacks. Defensive tackle Malik Collins, 5 sacks. So they're getting it from a couple different players, but mostly from the edge themselves. Injury report for this week. Ryan Kelly did not practice in Tuesday's walkthrough. Everything moved up a day this week, of course, with the Saturday game. With an ankle injury, Ryan Kelly saw him getting that taped up during the game, but he came back and played the second half. So I would venture to say, just by way of knowing Ryan Kelly and knowing what happened in that game and seeing him play, that this is just keep him out and keep him rested and not having him have to be on the field when he doesn't have to be there.
Yeah, and Chap always says, the early injury report doesn't really carry a whole lot of water.
Right.
And then also this is for a walkthrough as well. So,
and a similar position for Quentin Nelson, too, who's also out with an ankle injury.
Well, the update is Kelly did not practice today.
All right.
He's out there with a boot on his left foot.
Oh, that's not good.
Which is not good. Quentin Nelson is practicing. Kenny, I've not seen an update on Kenny Moore yet. So, but
he was limited.
What's that?
He was limited on Tuesday, at least. Sorry.
Right. Again, that's
a walkthrough again.
The estimation of if we held a practice.
Yes.
So we'll see. But Ryan Kelly is a big deal. You need him out there. There's, there is something of a drop off there, but you need to go in there with as many, of your top players. Zach Moss, it'd be great to have him back out there.
Yep.
And I think they've missed his changeup that they give him. So we'll get a better look when we get the injury report later today.
And really, injuries on the offensive line are important, obviously. And the Colts' offensive line has been playing at an incredibly high level. Like, we're turning back the clock 2-3 years to get to
I saw
how
Pro
they're
Football
playing.
Focus had him ranked number 8, which...
Well, they jumped up to number 4 this week.
Is
they
that
jumped
right?
up from 8 to 4 based on what happened last week against the Raiders.
I didn't believe the 8. I didn't think they were playing quite, because they were 8 after the debacle in Atlanta. So I hadn't seen the latest. I sometimes use what PFF mentions, but I thought, because somebody had a great game. Was it Bernard Ryman or somebody? After he did not have a great game,
right?
Because they've got him as like the 4th ranked tackle.
Yep.
Overall
4th ranked tackle in the NFL.
But these guys, they do what they do, and you either trust them or you don't.
And the thing that I guess
4th.
The thing about that is, like, it all depends on how much you weigh good and bad outcomes, because the bad outcome for an offensive tackle is so much badder, to use terrible grammar, than a good outcome is good.
Is gooder.
Exactly. So I'm still from your playbook.
It's better to be gooder and not badder.
Yes, exactly. Bad for an offensive lineman is very, very bad. Good is just nothing. Like it's thankless. That's what it is.
You did your job.
Exactly. So it's hard. That's one aspect of what makes their job. So I'll criticize Pro Football Focus occasionally, but I do it very much on the other side of the coin, saying what they do is hard, what they do is time-consuming, what they do is put a whole lot of research into what they do. So what they do actually has merit. It's just not a perfect metric to judge what's going on. It is a metric. So when we say they're the fourth-ranked offensive line according to their judgment, and Ryman is the fourth-ranked offensive tackle, you can say that both of them are having above-average seasons in the NFL for sure, and you know that to be a fact. It's just about really working them into exactly where they are gets a little bit more murky based on what they're asked to do and what they've given up, what they haven't given up, and all that.
Well, and we can just use our eye test to tell us that Bernhard Raimann is the left tackle of the future. Mm-hmm. I don't really need a grade. You can just see. Now, he's had a couple of subpar games. Every lineman has that game. They just do so. What we've seen from Bernie in year 2 is one of the big takeaways going into next year is, okay, we've got that. And as we talked about last week, the people that thought they should move on from Braden Smith, we saw his value last week when he virtually made Max Crosby disappear.
How about that?
Which is really hard to do.
Hard to do.
How about that, man? And then in the locker room afterward, I wasn't there, but I've heard several people talk about this, just how Braden was kind of at his locker afterward, just kind of composing himself after the game.
I think he was mentally spent because of all that he went through to get there.
And having the massive ice pack on his knee afterwards. I don't know what he's playing through to get back, but I know he's not fully healthy. He missed 4 games with a knee injury. I would imagine he's going to have surgery this offseason.
We're going to find out that he'll have something in surgery, and that, if this had been 4-12-1, he would have already had it.
100%.
But he's in there because they're in it, and he wants to give them the best chance.
On the outside, I mean, we're sort of close to it, but people on the outside have no idea what these guys go through. We're in the locker room last week after the Raiders game, and we're waiting for Michael Pittman. Gets his 100th catch and, career best yards and all that. I'm telling you, he walks slower from the shower to his locker stall than I do, and I'm not exactly moving real quick right now.
Not Usain Bolt here,
right? So it's these guys, what they put themselves through on game day, not so much during the week because it's sort of you're trying to get yourself back.
Right.
It's truly amazing. So I can only imagine what Braden Smith and all the time too. He's hearing I think he missed 3 games with the knee. But people are saying, well, why isn't he out there? What's taking so long? And he has to hear that at some level. So he's, some part of him is saying, I've got to get back out there, yet knowing that he's not ready. Mm-hmm. So I thought he's one of those guys. He's a little like Anthony Costanzo, where you wanted more until he's not there, and you thought he's pretty good.
Right.
So, Braden Smith's pretty good.
And he was limited in practice walkthrough on Tuesday as well. So he was out there. At least, which is more than what we could say, like I said, for Ryan Kelly or Quentin Nelson. Cornerback Chris Lamals with the ankle injury, if that's how you pronounce it. And I think
Isn't there a pronunciation thing here by our producer?
Sorry,
no, I thought that one was familiar enough to you guys.
He was basically filling in for Kenny Moore, who was out. So, but Kenny being back limited on Tuesday is encouraging sign.
Lamals?
I believe it is.
I think he played every play.
I think he did.
He had played 32 snaps in 4 seasons.
Yeah, how about that?
Defense.
And then he's out there for last week's win. Taven Bryan with a calf, Isaiah Land, hip, Tyquan Lewis with a back, all full participants in practice on Tuesday, walkthrough. Texans also a walkthrough on Tuesday. Will Anderson Jr. did not practice with an ankle injury. Fullback Andrew Beck with a calf did not practice. Neither did wide receiver Noah Brown. Defensive tackle Malik Collins, hip. Defensive end Jonathan Grenard. There it is. Thanks for that pronunciation, Matt. With the ankle. Defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, ankle. Tackle Laramie Tunsil, groin. Wide receiver Robert Woods, hip. So a quite the list of players there who did not practice for the Texans.
And some pretty impactful players. I mean, I expect that most of them will play, but circle Laramie Tunsil on there especially.
Huge.
Because he's a very big part of that line, literally and figuratively.
Yes, and listen, I've said this before on this podcast that this one specifically, that the Colts got 6 sacks of C.J. Stroud back in week 2. But, big but here, that at least three of their starters on the offensive line in that game were injured. And I believe Tunsil was one of them, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
so,
he did not play in that game.
There were multiple players on that line that were not playing. So, like the 6 sacks, the Colts defensive line did what they were supposed to do in that game. They tore up what was an undermanned offensive line and got to the rookie quarterback time in, time out, made him unsettled, made him uncomfortable. And that's one reason why the offense for the Texans was so subpar in that game, because that offensive line was not healthy.
So he still threw for 384 yards. I realize that some of that came in the garbage time of the fourth quarter, but still, he had a 384-yard game despite some of the difficulties they faced there.
Right. And so this is going to be a game where he is, I think, less encumbered just by the people around him and what he has to work with there.
And Nico Collins still had a very nice game for them in that first matchup as well.
Yes, he did.
So more than 100 yards, 140 yards, something along those lines.
Yes. So we have the Colts and Texans, 8:15 this Saturday. A spot in the playoffs on the line. The Texans will visit the Colts here at Lucas Oil Stadium. And the line for this game, I'm looking it up right now. Let's see here. The Texans are 1-point favorites. The over-under 47.5, so that's slightly a higher number than we've seen in recent weeks. Vegas eyeing something along the lines of a 24-23 ball game or a 25-24 ball game. I will go first. Matt can go second. Chap can wrap us up with third with our predictions for this week. And with what we've got in this game, I think it's a very apt matchup in Week 18, just from two teams, obviously, that are in very similar scenarios. So it's deserving that the team that wins moves on. It is. Like, sometimes you feel like you're put in unfair scenarios. This is not unfair at all. Like, you beat a team that's very similar to you, you get to go into the playoffs. I'm leaning toward the Texans because of what C.J. Stroud has done in his rookie year, honestly. I think he's been, I've said this before on this podcast, I was completely wrong about him coming out of college. I didn't think that he was going to be anywhere near the player that he is. And he proves me and other people wrong week after week with what he does on the field. So I like what they've done with him in the lineup. They definitely had a hiccup when he was out of the lineup, but they still went at least 1-1 during those two games. Yeah, they split those two games. So it's more than just Stroud too. Like what that franchise did is truly remarkable, taking what was a team completely devoid of talent and a Hail Mary on 4th and 30-something against the Colts in the last game of last season right here at Lucas Oil Stadium from getting Bryce Young probably. Well, what a remarkable thing. We can come full circle to that, being in this situation last year between two awful teams that had nothing going for them last season. That one play took the Texans out of the number 1 draft pick, put them number 2, and allowed them in that point to take C.J. Stroud and just completely change the trajectory of that franchise. Absolutely remarkable that one play, one ball that goes through Rodney Thomas's hands at the goal line gives the Colts one more loss, allows them to be in the spot to draft Anthony Richardson, and that's the Texans move back and puts them in the spot to take C.J. Stroud. I'd say both teams are pretty happy with how that went down, looking at things now, back a year later. But all that to say, bringing me back to the prediction, I think the Texans get this because of how much Stroud has impressed me and the fact that I still think that they've shown so much more than I thought they were without Stroud in the lineup. Like, you look at when we ran down their offensive playmakers, quote unquote playmakers, like Nico Collins, Robert Woods, Noah Brown, Dalton Schultz, Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce. I mean, you're not seeing Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson or even Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins in that list, and yet they're still killing it on a weekly basis. So I'm going with the Texans, and I'm going with the score of. I think it's going to be close. I think I'm going to be a little funky with my final score. I'm going 27-26. But I think it's going to be a great game, and I think there's going to be a lot to be happy about after this season. Even if the Colts lose, like it's easy for me to say. You know, I'm not in that locker room. I'm not in that building. But I think I'll just stick with my gut on this one. I think the Texans get it. I'm going to go right there with that 1-point favorite. I'm sticking with that. So I got Texans 27-26. Matt, what do you think?
I hope that I'm wrong. I've been thinking about this all week, and just with the Colts having some secondary concerns being one of their primary concerns, the fact that Stroud has been so effective passing the ball. They gave up almost 300 yards to Aiden O'Connell last week on defense. I know that the Texans can score the ball. So I'm going to go Houston in this one. I'm going to go 31-28. I think it would be a high-scoring game because I do think the Colts will be able to scheme up some stuff and find some big plays there. But in the end, I just think that the Stroud advantage that Houston's going to have, their pass rushers, I'm going to go with them.
Chat.
Yeah, this is an Indy-based podcast, so we can't be all Texans all the time. You go with the better quarterback, which everything says it's C.J. Stroud, the rookie, over Gardner Minshew. I'm going to pick with the heart instead of the head, and I'm just going to go Colts 27-24. You get close to these guys, and you just want to see – this isn't homerish. It's just being around them. You want to see them finish it and get that playoff and move forward. I don't care what they do after that. So since I'm not betting with my money, if I were betting with your money, I'd still take Colts 27-24. With my money, I probably wouldn't, but let's get them past the finish line.
Either one of these teams, whoever makes the playoffs now, this is just such a remarkable turnaround from last year where they were at this point. So we eagerly anticipate Saturday night, 8:15 kickoff, ESPN broadcast, Texans visiting the Colts inside Lucas Oil Stadium with a playoff spot on the line. Win or lose, we'll be back next week. So for Mike and Matt, I'm Dave, and take care and good luck. Have a fun weekend, and we'll see you next week on the Colts Blue Zone Podcast.